Welcome guys, gals, and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts. With me as always is your other haunted host,
Brian. Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, pretty haunted. I just ate a Cool Pop from our freezer, because we always have Cool Pops in the freezer at the moment because I like them. And I have a little bit of...
You numb?
No, what the other thing?
Brain freeze.
Brain freeze, a little bit of brain freeze, yeah.
Technically these are called freeze pops, so I wonder if Cool Pops are a brand name.
I think Cool Pops are what we call them in Ireland specifically. So it's one of those like very specific regional things, like chasing. We used to call it chasing, right?
Yeah, like when you would run after someone in the playground.
Yeah, what Americans would call tag.
Oh yeah, I suppose that's a good point.
And in England, I think it's called various things, but like my granny calls it tig. He's from Donegal, or
that might have relation to something else we were talking about earlier.
What?
About the word tig in the north.
Yeah, true. I don't know too much about this, but anyway. I think Cool Pops specifically are quite a regional thing. So basically, they're like I don't know, long frozen ice pops,
flavored water, basically.
Flavored water, yeah. Mr. Freeze is the brand of choice for most people, I think.
That's his name. Don't worry about
it. But yeah, very regional.
Absolutely. So from cool pops to cool guys talking about a cool TV show. This week we were talking about episode 18 of season 4 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, entitled Where the Wild Things Are. Brian, I was about to call you Buffy there for a second. Brian, would you like to kick us off with a Buffy and summary for this episode?
For sure. So this was first aired on April 25th, 2000. And it was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Goodbye Iowa. And it was written by Tracy Forbes, who last wrote Something Blue, but also wrote Beer Bad. This is the last episode she will write. This sounds awful, but I'm glad, because
there's no way around that. That does sound awful.
Yeah, but like it's.
I think she's potentially written quite a bit of Star Trek as well.
Oh really? That explains a lot. Okay, here's your Buffy and summary. Buffy and Riley's lovemaking triggers and sustains poltergeist activity, which causes sexual shame and general weirdness. The source of this is children disciplined when the house was an orphanage. Xander and Anya raise Buffy and Riley before they die of exhaustion. Yeah, short but sweet. It's
a really brief description actually for a lot that happens, like a lot of sequences.
Yeah.
In the episode.
One of the things I found about this episode was that just it lasted a long time unnecessarily. It just took so long. Didn't like it.
Sexual shame and then weird things happen. There's the tagline.
Yeah. Okay. What do you want to talk about for the Bronze Panther, Joel?
Well, I thought what might be of slight interest to talk about is probably one of the most successful, engaging and artful video games ever made. A AAA title, The Last of Us Part 2, which is also one of the most successful, one of the only games really that has ever had a leading character and narrative that's about a gay individual, and it's also been incredibly successful, both critically and commercially.
Yeah.
Which we've been playing, or where you've been playing, and I've been screaming at as things jump out of the shadows.
It's true. I'm quite happy because a lot of I was gonna say incels, but like incels online have been really up in arms about The Last of Us 2, because they think, the social justice warriors took a good game, which was the first Last of Us game, and made it, I don't know, gay or bad or feminist or something, and which is hilarious because they obviously didn't actually play The Last of Us Part 1 because that was full of that shit as well. But also, yeah, I mean, it's so nice to hear that you can kind of ruin a bunch of really shitty people's day just by including a queer woman in something.
Yeah.
The power.
Having a good time and ruining people's day.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been really good. It's visually just incredible. So there's no ray tracing, but I wouldn't know if there was, because as everyone has established, no one actually knows what ray tracing is.
Yeah. So for I suppose for very brief context for us, so anyone who isn't intimately familiar, The Last of Us, the original, which was released in, I want to say 2013.
Yeah, 2013.
Is a game about a man, the eponymously named Joel, who...
That's who you're named after, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Who meets a young girl called Ellie in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, one that's been devastated by kind of a spore-driven, but also like a slightly ecological zombie plague.
Yeah.
And helps her... they're an unlikely odd couple that end up together, and they cross the country, and it's very emotional. It's very good.
There are giraffes.
There are giraffes.
It's a really nice moment.
it's stunning. It was a great example at the time of what the video game technology could do, both in terms of technically, but also how you can tell real human stories in an artful, engaging way that's accessible, as we often advocate, to everyone. And The Last of Us Part 2 has been hotly anticipated because it was never intended or expected that there would be a sequel to that game. It was very standalone. And as Brian pointed out, the original game puts a lot of emphasis on a young Ellie who is very specifically frontlined by the end of the game as a lesbian, as a gay woman.
Was it the first game? No, it was in the DLC of the first game. Yeah,
so I would include that when I'm in discussion of the first game.
Okay.
Yeah, as part of the first game, because it's not part of the second game.
True.
So that's was very notable at the time. Had a very well handled, very interesting queer story, and now to have for the second game, Ellie as the kind of one of the central protagonists, putting I don't think it's any spoiler to say kind of her and her girlfriend kind of traveling together for at least a portion of what we played so far, and very much front and center, and as a very nuanced person who is taking a role, kind of a forward role in an action orientated setting is highly unusual in the main, and then to have it executed in a way which is so gripping and technically, so definitely important to have this story told and to feel present in the game, and to feel that games represent us and tell stories that we can relate to directly. That by itself is significant, but for it to be part of a game which is so mainstream and is so technically impressive and so mechanically rich, the combat is thrilling and fair and complex, the art design, the sound design, the acting, it's one of a kind. It's one of a kind, and we're there. So it's very, very exciting. Now we estimate we're probably about 14 hours into it, maybe a 30 plus hour game. Mm-hmm. So we're still early days on it, but it's been a very specific screen-filled journey of us kind of as equally trying to navigate and survive this wasteland as Dina and Ellie are in the game, I think.
Yeah, it's also nice in the sense that like it's actually related quite little to the current pandemic. I suppose that pandemic, which is nice. But it's funny. Our friend Keane was asking me yesterday if we were going to talk about The Last of Us this week, because he's excited because he's a huge fan of the game and he listens to the podcast. Because he chronically cannot not listen to podcasts. Which is really funny because a couple of years ago I was like, oh, you should listen to this podcast. And he was like, I don't listen to podcasts. And now he obsessively does, which is great. But he's asking if we're going to be talking about it. And I said, probably not.
And here we are.
Yeah. I lied to you, Keane. It's because you're a loser and I hate you.
So I suppose, Brian, given that you're in the driving seat for this playthrough of this game, what are the things that are most enjoyable or most, I suppose, interesting about it for you?
Okay, so I mean, like, the world around you feels really, really responsive. There's this really nice thing that a lot of people have highlighted, but I thought was quite good, which is that, like, if you go up to a window, you can smash it, which is not unusual. But, like, where in other things, what you might do in a situation in terms of collision with, like, a window, if you're about to smash it, is you might swing something, it'll go through the window will shatter around it, and it'll fall. And that's grand. In this, what happens is that you'll do something like you'll get the butt of your knife. Is that what it's called? No, it's the butt of a gun. What's on a knife?
The handle of the hilt. Yeah. Well, the handle specifically.
Yeah, the handle of a knife, and you'll kind of like use you basically backhand it to like do that kind of like thing where you'll like bounce against it and it'll smash around you. It's much more. It's physically like I've never realized before that it was inaccurate in other games.
But concession that you're making, you're playing games. It's like, oh, this can't happen as it does.
And that's really cool. Or just things like just being responsive to the environment in terms of I was like walking through a pond with some algae in it the other day, and I was leaving that kind of like algae trail that you see ducks will leave if they're in a pond, where you can see like the algae bloom kind of like move out of the way instead of just kind of like dispersing, but like in a really clumped way. It was really cool. And just I don't know, it's really, really pleasant to watch a character develop in the main character, Ellie, who really it's one of those things where, you know, when you have so many characters based who rely on tropes and stereotypes to develop a character, you know, they're shorthand. And shorthand is really important. Tropes are really important to be able to convey characterization in situations, as in it's sometimes lazy writing to rely on tropes, but it's sometimes very, very necessary. Whereas in this, it doesn't feel like any tropes could apply to this character because she's been so developed over such a long period of time, in terms of your engagement with her. So in the first game, you spend kind of like a long time watching her as an older character, watching her develop, and then seeing her, and then eventually playing her in the game to kind of like to take her into a bit more responsibility and explore the kind of like the darkness developing in her, which sounds ridiculous, but because she had to, like, it's a murderous world.
The trauma, really. And the hardness. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in this game, she is developing reactions to things like spite and hatred and, you know, understanding and impatience and stuff in a way that, just couldn't be tropic because it's so developed.
Yeah.
So she could be standing there and be like the most stereotypical lesbian of all time, or she could be the most stereotypical, like, you know, hyper feminine girl of all time. And it would feel like she had arrived there so specifically because you've seen it so extensively. Yeah, I'm not sure if that even makes sense, but it just feels like a very natural and very deserved progression of a character.
No, I understand exactly what you mean. I think it's a good example of how, you know, in many ways the negative side of fandom, modern fandom, and, you know, Buffy is an example of this as much as anything else, is that you put the protagonist or your favorite character as this infallible godhead at kind of the head of this cult of personality,
or deeply dull and, you know, bland, so it can be an everyman.
Or you reduce them fundamentally to their tropes and their tropes and their archetypes being their only factors, where tropes are meant to be something that help you articulate a conversation about a character,
or a beginning point even.
Exactly, help you start building that character, but are not an end point. And something I've been thinking about with watching Ellie develop and how kind of, you know, The Last of Us works is actually a point which I thought was quite salient from a podcast which I listened to before, which is The Adventure Zone, which is a well-known D&D podcast. But as those characters very organically developed on that show and went from really nothing into quite well codified characters or personalities, one of the cast mentioned that people often would say to him, "Oh, your character wouldn't do this," or "I didn't like this choice because your character wouldn't do that, and that's not who he is." And he made the point, he's like, I'm that character. As in, like, it's my character. So if I say that's what happened, like, your archetypes, your tropes, your motivations are suggestions, are impulses, are directions, but they're not ironclad. They aren't restrictive coding. They're just influences.
It's funny that we say that because we've so specifically over the years suggested that, like, Buffy and characters around her aren't voiced right in certain episodes, and, like, Buffy and all those characters are the property of that writer for that episode. And what we're trying to, I suppose, I mean, you know, you can suggest that there's some, like, inconsistency in the portrayal potentially in the writing, but at the same time, I mean, like, that's what Buffy did there, you know?
Yeah, but, like, I suppose you can easily identify an episode of Buffy when she's being portrayed as acting out of character. I think when we say that they're not in the right voice, it's when they're saying that her actions, which will usually be considered out of character, are portrayed as this is what she would always do in this situation, and that's where the disjoint in this is there. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it's actually a lot of thematic links between The Last of Us and games like that, and that kind of more forward thinking area of the genre, where they're saying, like, what can we say with interactive stories that people have to take part in over 20 or 30 hours that we can't say in other forms of media. But a lot of the themes in The Last of Us, and if anyone hasn't played it or doesn't usually play video games, I almost push you to say, try this. And, you know, even you can absolutely play these games on the simplest or the easiest difficulty setting just for the story, but like, there is a quality of really emotional experience, which if you're a fan of Buffy, of a bit of humor this sounds like a segue, but this is actually a point. If you're a fan of a bit of humor, a bit of emotional sincerity, a bit of queer content, and a really strong story for women, like this is definitely an endpoint for that for you to experience in a really kind of intimate way, I think, a really kind of like interior way.
What's funny is I'm not sure if I'd recommend it if you haven't played the first game, weirdly.
This is true, but that game's so easy to get now.
It is, yeah. The PS4 remaster version is just immaculate. So
yeah, absolutely. So to capitalize on that segue, talking about strong feminist action adventure stories, including queer female characters, we have to now talk about this episode. Sex-isode. Where words are just flung around with that usual, way Buffy's so great at inventing new language and, inventing slang the way the kids speak, like the term poltergasm.
Yeah, that was a choice.
Which is used in this episode by Xander. And he is not cast from the village in disgrace. So essentially, as you have summarized briefly there, this is I think we feel slightly disjointed episode, but an interesting thing to watch for certain. Which involves, Riley and Buffy they're just going at it as they're giving into their primal biblical urges.
It's so funny because even the structure of the episode is kind of weird like that. It's are they influenced by the kind of like the energy? So basically the suggestion is these children have been abused at the frat house because it used to be an orphanage, and by a woman who was some degree of like Christian Puritan kind of.
She comes across as very like militantly Catholic, I think. So
and her basically she abused them. She did things like she made them cut their hair if they were being prideful, and she held them under water if they were being had impure thoughts and stuff like this. And so none of them were killed, but their repressed energy is now expressing itself as a poltergeist or group of poltergeist. It was pretty uncertain about itself, and that's actually fine for me. But what I was thinking was, is it a situation where Buffy and Riley's inherent horniness is causing this situation, or is that influenced by the energies?
Yeah, kind of a R-rated chicken and the egg kind of scenario. And it just coincidentally happens to be that it is in the frat house where all the initiative live, and which is above their initiative laboratory, is one that has a sex poltergeist possessing it, which doesn't really work for me.
No, how has this never become an issue before
or since? So essentially, yes, we have
especially given that they haven't resolved anything by the end of the episode, like at all. There's no resolution except they open the door and stop Buffy and Riley having sex, and therefore they're saved. The children and their energies are fucked, and the woman who did it, they're just like
so again, as Xander says, they disconnected the battery from the Boo factory. It's an odd episode. It starts off with kind of contributing again to this kind of recurring theme we have of slaying and combat, making people
horny.
I think I was trying to think of some varied words for it, but definitely the heightened, and Buffy and Riley are very kind of beg into each other after they're slaying. And there's a little bit of a tick over of the main plot where they say that they know is that a demon and a vampire are working together, and this is indicative of Agam. But more so than ever, I'm like, this is in lip service only to the idea of the main plot. But they become trapped in the house, and there's this party that they've organised for the frat to let off steam. And so I think what this episode was going for is really, again, probably as much as Beer Bad, trying to lean into the setting of we're at college, we need to do American Pie type antics, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that kind of hormonal teenage energy, slightly childish or immature gags or routines, etc. So it's all at that level. And as Brian, as I was saying to you during the episode, is I don't know if this episode, and usually I think it doesn't have themes.
No,
it kind of doesn't have that depth of, even if you're looking for it, this is really about how these characters relate to each other on a below the surface level. It's all and that's fine in many ways, but it's all surface interactions. It's all exactly as it's presented.
One of the things I was reading about, actually, the only thing I could find, would you believe, very few places have written about this episode critically or academically. One of the things I was reading was Mark Field
academically, do you mean?
Academically, was Mark Field had written that someone who, in his comments on his blog, had suggested that the thorns surrounding Buffy's and Riley's sex den that prop up and have a physical hand attack Anya with, which was a great moment. That they might be like Sleeping Beauty related almost imagery, which I was like, oh yeah, interesting. And then in Sleeping Beauty you have a lot of stuff about like the thorns representing repression and repressed desire, and also in Sleeping Beauty he was also saying that like the pricking of the thumb can sometimes be interpreted as being the beginning of the menstrual cycle in a young woman and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, but also no way intended for this episode.
No, not at all. I think it's very difficult to draw inference to any of those kind of usual themes around sexual awakenness, sexual awareness, sexual engagement, because like Buffy's fully actualizing this, I think, by this point, you know. I think there's maybe something to be said about her sexual journey in this season, in the sense that she's gone from only having slept with Angel, that going incredibly badly, obviously, then sleeping with Parker, and that was pretty awful as well. And then she was quite surprised by Riley even being there the next morning, and you know, her relationship with Riley is like the first time she gets to be kind of like, you know, sexually exploratory or enjoying sex, you know. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, but I think while all that's there, this, as you said, this kind of the episode where Buffy seems to have no actual consternation about sex at all, you know. So we have really a focus in the episode on multiple couples, and multiple pairings, and you have Riley and Buffy are kind of completely sidelined once they're plugged into the sex factory. So true. So they're not really in the episode after that. There's a lot of focus on Xander and Anya's relationship, and how Anya has trouble understanding that, you know, even as the relationship becomes a bit more settled and it's not purely driven by lust, that there's still an emotional connection between them. So it's kind of that developing, and then we've got a number of intercooks between Willow and Tara, who themselves aren't necessarily having any problems in this episode, but are used for, I would argue, for the supernatural scenes that don't fit with Xander and Anya. Do you know what I mean? So Xander and Anya are seeing one side of what's happening in the house, and then Tara and Willow are on the side where they're kind of pushing each other away, but for a different reason. So it's kind of, you actually have a number of set pieces, I think. I have a question for you. You know, when so basically what happens is that Willow and Tara are sitting on stairs during this party. Willow goes to touch Tara's hand, and Tara like freaks out and says, "Don't touch me, that's disgusting." It's supposed to be like, you know, a repression of sexual feeling and discuss it yourself, etc. It's almost a nuanced moment, but it's not. But Tara then runs off into the bathroom. Willow goes after her and finds a man drowning and saves him, etc. Where does Tara go? Yeah, I thought that because a couple of scenes later, Tara is there and she says, with them. She's just like, "Oh, I'm fine," etc. So I think that this episode is constructed around images, and it's like, let's see the kid drowning in the bathtub, let's the orgasm wall that if you touch it makes you orgasm, the idea of Spike being strapped suddenly down by the house, and obviously the girl with the full head of luscious red hair feeling dirty and cutting all her hair off, and managing to have like the most perfectly like smooth bald head at the end, having used like a knife to cut it off. I'd say she's doing great in this particular climate, but everything else is kind of about connecting those scenes together, which is fine in the sense that, like, that is how a lot of horror based scenarios go, but it restrains like from being the elevated horror that Buffy is so often known for. But which is funny because this episode does feel a bit more like, I think you said this before the episode, but I have it in my notes too, is that it does feel like a bit more of a traditional horror movie, or a, you know, a cheap 80s slasher or teen horror movie, in a sense that, like, there are plenty of scenes like that. So in the beginning of the episode, Riley is wandering around the frat house looking for, I think he's going to get a glass of water or something, and he's expecting to see something, and it's just a dripping bathtub. And I was like,
that kind of like, really basic bait and switch where it's like raise it attention and then drop it, but without having a really payoff in any way. And then at one point, when Willow finds the guy in the bathtub, there's also a moment where she's very specifically like bending down over the bathroom sink, where she's not looking in the mirror anymore, setting herself up for a very perfect like look when she looks back in the mirror, her face being disfigured or there being someone behind her.
I would always go for someone behind you.
And nothing like that. And it was almost like the writer and the director kind of knew that there was supposed to be something there, or something like this is something that you do, but didn't quite understand why or
missing the prestige.
Missing
the part of the trick where you pay it off.
Yeah, for sure.
And you have like one of the Initiative boys, never seen before, never seen again, to my knowledge.
Who's like I recognize you to Spike.
No, actually, him I think actually maybe had been it before. No, the guy who's stoking. When you're a frat house, you just want to chill out after a long day of lectures, and you start like a full roaring fire in the fireplace, and he's stoking it while making like really like off the shelf dialogue about the fact that Riley and Buffy are having sex, and then it just explodes in his face. And it's like, oh, he got his eyebrows burnt off. It's fine. Weird, huh? It's just like there's a lack of urgency to a lot of what happens in the episode.
It's because they didn't have very much plot to fill it with. That's one of the major issues with this episode versus like another Monster of the Week grand episode of Buffy. Like Monster of the Week grand episodes of Buffy have like scenes, and they have advancement of plot and stuff around them. And this just has nothing. It just has like, it has a couple of notes and it plays those, and then it's like, oh.
And I think developing on that issue is that
I also have a real issue with the title.
Where the Wild Things Are?
Yeah. Like, obviously a reference to the Maurice Sendak, I want to say, Sendak book, but has no relation to it whatsoever, in the sense, like, there's no... Like, that book is about, like, childhood escapism. I mean, like, it's a children's book, and there are children being attacked, or being in this episode, but, like, the sexual stuff, that certainly does not exist in the book. Wild Thing, I think, is suggested in the Buffy wiki as being like sex. Yeah,
doing the wild thing, which is what all the kids say to each other on the message boards. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that if you compare it to another episode, which I think is structurally somewhat similar, which is Halloween House, whatever that episode is called. Fear Itself. So again, you're trapped in kind of a frat-like house. You have these teenage extras, you have all these scares, etc.
You enter in with the concept, which is like that, the character's going to see their own fears manifested, and that's great. And like there's a fear demon feeding on it. And this one, like in the same way that the structure of this episode is that, like, children were abused and their energy is lashing out.
But what is lacking is that everything that happens in the episode is first act territory for a different episode, because there's nowhere to escalate, because you have no specific threat. As far as I can tell, aside from the vague sense of danger and unease, the poltergeist is not trying to kill anyone.
No.
It inconveniences them, it scares them, it does weird shit, but there's no moment of like, haha, he burnt his eyebrows off, that's hilarious, and then it escalates to someone having their throat cut.
Yeah.
You can't kill the poltergeist, really. They distract it long enough to unplug Buffy from the sex battery, but they specifically say that these kids aren't dead, they've actually grown up to be disturbed adults. And you also can't kill the old woman, or apparently arrest her for all the abuse she perpetrated. So you can't actually neutralize any of the threats, but simultaneously none of the threats are actually, it's parlor tricks to a certain degree. So I think that's what keeps it from being like, it never gets to that point where it kind of kicks up.
Yeah, there's nothing to escalate. There's no core to this episode. There's no plot.
Yeah, the biggest danger I did feel was Anya bringing Spike to the Initiative house for a party.
That was a bit.
He was very
funny.
He was very spooked out. Yeah.
It was a good episode for Anya, though, in lots of ways, in the sense that, like, I think this is probably the most, it's by far the most Anya-centric episode to this point.
Yeah. Anya and Xander saved the day, essentially, at the end. Yeah,
it's very odd. And one of the things I was reading was that, like, it's a suggestion that potentially the reason that Anya and Xander were able to do it is that they're sexually the most established of the three couples, and sexually the most confident. Anya is expressing what she wants. Xander is communicating back that he's not, or he also wants, but like, whatever. She has her insecurities there, but they have an open communication method. whereas Willow and Tara are reasonably new at this, and there's lots of there are just lots of like complexities there. And Buffy and Riley obviously have huge communication issues and an inability to engage with each other in any way except sexual.
And I think Buffy and Riley also have a certain naivete to how they engage with each other.
Yeah.
Like there's something slightly more broken in about Anya and Xander as people, whereas Buffy and Riley are always, I think people like that who are so idealistic are often very like, you're going to get caught out by things very, very, very easily.
Buffy and Riley's relationship is kind of like they're more similar to high school sweethearts in the sense that they feel like people who everyone presumed should be together, so they got together, and no one really knows why they stayed together when they don't. So.
Yeah, exactly. So there are some positives in the episode. Yeah, well, the Giles stuff, I think, is great. Yeah. So we have this very clear distinction where the kids go to their cool rockin' party, and Giles says he has to go to an adult gathering for adult things they wouldn't be interested in. At the espresso pump. It's finally paying off. And when they go to find him, he is Anthony Stewart Head is performing a very soulful cover of Behind Blue Eyes by
The Who.
By The Who.
Very famously covered by Limp Bizkit after this episode. But it's been covered like a million times. But it was covered by Limp Bizkit in 2003 for the movie Gothica, and the music video for it very famously had Fred Durst and... No, not Fred Durst. Is that right?
Fred Durst is in Limp Bizkit, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And Halle Berry, like, being emotional towards each other in a mental institution. I
used to have one of the many assumptions I've made in my life which have been wrong. The vast majority of assumptions I made in my life have been wrong. I used to think that Gothica would be the scariest film that was ever made if I saw it. Like when I saw pictures of it as a kid, I was like, if I was to watch this, I would be scarred for life.
Okay.
I don't think that would be the case.
No.
But yes, it's great. Anthony Stewart Head, fantastic singer. This is the first time he's
actually not playing guitar here apparently. He's miming it. He actually did a pretty good, reasonably good like version of like, I mean, I don't think he's playing the right chords or anything, but like he was doing bar chords reasonably normally.
Yeah, he fooled me. Great singer, and he pops in a little earring for his day out.
So uncomfortable.
But we have it's impossible to really like extract whether it's amplified by the house or not. But Anya, Willow, and Tara all talk about how sexy he is, which is like a big like question mark meme for me. But I get it. Yeah, I think
if you are a lesbian and you're you're gonna like. I mean, like, you're able to. Like, I'm able to tell if women are sexy. You know.
He said convincingly.
Yeah, I think this would do it for you. Yeah. You know, I think you'll be looking at like Giles, like suddenly sexy librarian, singing like a soulful acoustic cover of a Who song. You'd be like, yeah, okay. Well, if anything, this.
Yeah. It's like that famous quote. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Absolutely. I always feel like that was said in relation to Ulysses, but I don't think it actually was.
No, I would have to attribute it, but I'm pretty certain it was during obscenity stuff in the like 40s or 50s. I think it was more.
Well, I mean, like, obscenity stuff in the 40s and 50s in America, that's Ulysses.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, actually, when you say Ulysses, I just think of when it was written.
Yeah, fair. Subject of a very famous obscenity trial in the US, and it was turned out because it was like, this is very clearly just art.
Does it bother you that the whole way through that trial it was probably pronounced as Ulysses?
Yeah, it does bother me.
That hurt. So the Jaws stuff is good, and he has some funny lines because he's obviously having to interact with all this like horned up teenage raunchy R-rated comedy kind of stuff. At one point he says something along the lines of like, that he can't believe that Riley and Buffy would keep it up for this at a length of time, and he's like, for it to have different phrasing. So like, that's fun, but like, yeah. And like Spike's personality,
Spike and Anya interacting in the bronze was actually good fun.
Spike and Anya work well. I think it's an interesting conversation for them to have, and they continue to have about them both being different variations on not quite evil or not quite demonic, but having much more of a depth of first-hand experience of the supernatural world than any of the other characters. And
it's paving the way for them to, in season 6, when Xander and Anya break up, for their relationship to kind of like kick into gear a tiny bit.
I think James Marsters again does a great job of showing why he's like a useful, neutrally aligned character to kick about, because he can be used for certain things and he freely abandons them when it's not a benefit anymore.
Yeah, and he's always entertaining when he's on screen.
He's so literally and figuratively defanged here. Like, it is humiliating to watch him jump out and trying to boo scare people to get them to give him money so he can go buy beer.
Yeah, it's not good. One of the other things I was going to say was, it's just a bad episode.
At one point, Giles and Riley are discussing the fact that Adam might be bringing the different races of demons and supernatural creature together in one cause, and Willow says, just like Martin Luther King.
Yeah, and then looks very ashamed of herself.
As she well should.
Yeah.
As she well should.
She sure should. Okay, let's go into the dusting, I think.
Sure, absolutely.
So, I had a couple of notes. Oh yeah, and how well do you know that actor who played, I didn't catch her name actually, Genevieve Holt? Genevieve Holt.
So I recognize her. She is an older actor who is in a lot of things. And I'm sure as soon as you tell me who she is, it's going to be right there for me.
Yeah, Mrs. Landingham.
Yes.
From West Wing seasons 1, 2, and 3, I want to say. She does. This show is over 20 years old, so if it's a spoiler for you, then maybe that's a you thing and not a me thing. But she dies, and it's a point of one of the best episodes of West Wing where President Bartlett, like, screams at God, and it's
in a cathedral. Yeah.
In a cathedral, 2 cathedrals, I think is the name of the episode. Anyway, so she's also most famously in Desperate Housewives. She is Karen McCluskey, Mrs. McCluskey, and
they're always Irish. All women in these shows are always Irish extraction.
Yeah, and her character died like within a week of her actress dying, because basically she knew she was dying, and it just so happened that she it really coincided very closely, and everyone was like, "What the fuck?" And yeah, I just quite like her as an actor. Actually, she is perpetually played an old woman. She's never not been an old woman, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think there are some actors like that who it's either that they only get in at a certain age or they only start like fitting the mold at a certain age. But you need people who can play those roles. One
of them is your one who is Dennis's mother in Angel. Remember her? Who was also Sparkle Motion.
Sparkle Motion in Donnie Darko. Yeah,
she's always been an old woman.
But she's always like a strict older woman.
Yeah.
You get typecast even more tightly on that kind of stuff, I think.
Okay. There's a Felicity reference that we both pointed out because we've been watching a lot of The Americans recently, which also Felicity was a 90s TV show starring Kerry Russell about a young woman who's going from high school into college. She has chosen the college that she's going to purely on the basis that a guy she fancies is going there, and it's just an insane decision she makes, but it's all about her learning herself. But very famously, she cuts her hair off in one of the seasons, and it was shocking to everyone because she had long curly hair. So she had short hair, and everyone. So that's gone into the lexicon of the world forever as pulling a Felicity. There's a 6 Feet reference to it and everything. And in the final season of that show, there was time travel inexplicably.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I've heard about that.
So there's also a Evil Dead reference. Someone gets, I can't remember who. I think Xander called someone an evil he says to Anya, "Why have you brought the evil undead here?" Which I have to presume an Evil Dead reference.
Yeah, well, also the house being filled with prehensile vines,
True.
Which very graphically
sexually assaulty vines as well.
Yes, absolutely. Which very graphically stabs Anya's hand in a kind of violence which I think is uncommon for this show, where it did feel like it was like a prop hand burst open.
Yeah.
And she's just fine afterwards.
Yeah, and she's sitting there with her like hand punctured, and they're like, "Well, at least no one got hurt." And it's like,
yeah. Well, no one fully human got hurt. So.
True.
I think one of the things this episode will be remembered for as well is it's very responsible but very specific shot of them taking a Durex condom out of the drawer.
So funny. The music in the episode was actually reasonably good at various points, except for when they're like going around the house being like, "Oh, there's something going on," and then there was like loads of like harpy noises and ethereal vocals and woodwind instruments. But otherwise, it was actually quite tense and cool music, I thought.
You have such a personal vendetta against ethereal vocals.
I hate any vocals in music where it's
vocalizing, really.
Yeah, where it's not worded. I think there's very few situations, unless you're scatting, that you should be using vocals and not saying something.
What about the opening theme song of the original series of Star Trek? Where's that?
Oh, I hate it. I hate it. I hate that shit. Okay, and there is a poltergeist reference directly where Xander says, "House is clean," which is one of the things that they repeat a bunch of that.
This particular monster is like a poltergeist rat king, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
it
really
is. It's just like a conglomeration of weird energies.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any Buffy bits for us?
No, that was it for me, really. Other than kind of there's just not a lot of trivia about this particular episode. Do you want to talk about fashion?
Yeah, we'll do in a second. Actually, I have one thing I was going to say. Of the 3 references I could find to this episode, generally amongst a couple of different books of Buffy studies, one of them was like, yes, well, this episode is very famous because it features one of the only instances of Giles singing, and in this instance he is singing Freebird. And he does sing Freebird in the Yoko Factor, which is a couple episodes down the line. But imagine like writing that into your thing and being like, well, he's singing Freebird, and it's like, no, he's not.
Now I can clock off now for the day.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was really funny that one of the only references to this episode just
is wrong. Yeah. Another solid day done in the Buffy minds.
Mm-hmm. So some fashion there, Joel. I quite like at the beginning of the episode, Buffy's wearing a chunky knit turtleneck. It's quite cute.
And holographic pants while she's fighting. Yeah.
Bizarre. Riley is topless a good bit, which I appreciated.
Very hairless. Hairless.
Yeah, which was odd. Probably very specific. You know, I can't imagine you were like a young male actor in the like early noughties in Hollywood who wasn't being told by his agent to go to get waxed every week. The Xander is wearing a shirt with the sleeves cut off at one point in this episode, and it's just bizarre and awful looking.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not a sweater vest because it was like a shirt.
A shirt or vest?
Yeah, shirt. I'm not sure what it was. Forrest, who is one of the initiative guys, is wearing the most orange turtleneck I've ever seen in this episode.
It's very Nickelodeon.
Yeah. And I think that was all my fashion notes.
Willow makes an off-screen reference to something Buffy owns called a peasant top.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that.
Which maybe the more fashion-orientated of our listeners can let us know what that means, but I imagine it's not called that anymore.
Please send us a peasant top so we can see what it is. Like physically.
I was going to say our mentions are going to be inundated.
Our P.O. box is open to peasant tops. Okay.
P.O. box 00002.
I'm looking at a peasant top now. I don't care for it. So then you have death count, Joel. Do you want me to give it to you?
Please tell me the death count.
So you have the demon at the beginning of the episode and the vampire at the beginning of the episode.
Did they kill both of them, or did they scare them off?
They killed both of them.
Okay.
Killed by Buffy and the other guy.
Rosencrantz and Guns.
Riley, respectively.
The demons.
Yep, there you go.
Statler and Waldorf. That's another pair.
I don't know who those are.
I'm always surprised you don't retain this. They're the old Muppets.
Yes,
up in the balcony.
I do not retain that. Yeah. No, I don't know them. Okay, rating. Joel, what's your rating for this episode?
I would give this 6.0 dirty minds.
Oh, okay. Go on, tell me about that.
I thought it was a very odd episode to try and rate because I didn't think it was bad in the way episodes are usually poor.
Mm-hmm.
It was just very unusual, and it was very, very surfacey. Usually I find that episodes which I rate poorly are trying to do something in that kind of deeper or more more Moorish way and don't manage it. And this was just an episode of Buffy. Did happen.
Yeah.
And just all the sex talk was awkwardly done because it doesn't usually talk about that kind of stuff, and no one felt comfortable in this episode.
Yeah.
The scene where 5 extras are just each giving their rendition of what it sounds like to be aroused when they touch a magic wall, I felt uncomfortable for those performers. Absolutely.
I'm going to give this episode 4.1 poltergasms out of 10. Yeah, this is the worst episode of Buffy for my money's worth.
Really? Where the wild things are?
Yeah, where it's not actually about the content being inappropriate. So what was the episode? Not Something Blue.
Go Fish.
Go Fish absolutely was one of the big ones, and the other one, what was it called? It was previously in this season, Pangs, where I felt like, you know, Pangs just like fumbled an interesting topic and very contentious topic. This episode just like has no fucking idea what it's doing. Beer Bad, even I would watch Beer Bad any day over this, because Beer Bad was so chock full of comedy. The only reason this episode is getting even a 4.1 is the scene with Giles in the espresso pump is iconic and brilliant. But yeah, no, it's shit, so shit. I think this episode is garbage.
But I enjoy watching with you, Brian.
Oh, well, that's nice for you. So, shall we move on to the Cordelia Chase?
Yeah, so we have a slightly more
good
substantial Cordelia Chase this week with 5x5, which sees a continuation of Faith the Vampire Slayer. Her arc as she moves to LA, on the run from her kind of moment of clarity, but also trauma and guilt at the end of her last episode with Buffy, and in the course of being in the city, is picked up by the malicious and malevolent law firm Wolfram and Hurt, who want to use her as their ace in the hole to take a hit out on Angel. Who better to kill a meddlesome vampire than a unbalanced Slayer?
You're right.
And yeah, so it's a great episode. It's an episode that I think we will agree is worthy of Buffy.
Yep, I think it would have been better handled had it been in the Buffy context, probably.
But as we said, it's kind of funny because it's an episode of the spin-off show, and the characters in it are Cordelia, Wesley, Faith, and Angel. So I pointed out when we were watching it, no one had to be introduced to anyone. Like, this is all ready to go. Yeah. But I think it's a very
which is a real problem for the like just the like finicky parts of writing, because you have to write a spin-off as if the people haven't watched or aren't mega fans of the original. Yeah. Because you do want to hook in new viewers as well. You can't like limit yourself to like people who are also fans of Buffy. And what you've done here is you've created a situation like you have people like Doyle so that you can explain, oh, here's what Buffy is like, or here's what this situation is with Faith. There's nothing like that here because they had no characters to
that's why I think spin-offs in this context are a bit of a poison chalice, because you're either so divorced from your parent show that you're not benefiting from it, or you're always going to be compared, and that's kind of what happens here. So you'd be absolutely correct. There's no viewpoint character to discuss the Faith stuff. You have to have watched the Buffy episode and then come here for the continuation, essentially.
Right.
So it's all punchy. The dialogue is good. The tension is there. Faith always feels genuinely threatening when she's in a scene. I really do feel that, you know, the same way when Angelus goes bad, you feel trapped in here with him. I feel that with Faith when she's trying to hurt someone. I think that she continues to, in every single scene where she tries to psychoanalyze something, she's completely wrong all the time. Yeah. Which is
she's really not insightful as a person.
She's not. It's really consistent though. I feel sorry for her in this because she seems so ragged and so run down. But there's a lot of great scenes in it. There's a lot of tense home invasion kind of stuff. Specifically, Faith kidnaps Wesley, her once watcher, and tortures him. And I'm very much of the opinion, I think it's kind of canonized by the show, that she takes on this job to kill Angel because she wants to suicide by vampire. She feels that she's bad, she's broken, she deserves to be killed, and she wants to provoke Angel to do it. And the scenes between Faith and Wesley are, I think, Alexis Denisoff's best scenes to date.
I'd agree. There's a real he's developed a real natural seriousness to his delivery here, which is really impressive.
Yeah, I think it ages him, it matures him. There's a lot of, actually, for once in the spin-off format, useful contrast being used, because these scenes between Faith and Wesley contrast between Angelus and Giles at the end of season 2 of Buffy, when Angelus was torturing Giles. They contrast with the end of season 3 of Buffy, where Angel is trying to redeem Faith or offer some actual I'm also bad and I relate stuff. And the scenes that we see from in this episode, flashbacks to just after Angel was ensouled and he tries to kill a human, he can't do it, actually has some useful meat to contrast between.
They're my favorite flashbacks for Angel so far, in the sense that
they've meant something in the episode.
It wasn't just giving you background, it was giving you emotional context.
And explaining, like, okay, we having an Angel just after he's ensouled, so racked by guilt, and he actually wants to kill, but he can't bring himself to it. And in the future, Faith is racked by the guilt. She's trying to provoke Angel to want to kill her, and because he can hold that back, he has an opportunity to help her. And this actually catalyzes a distinct rift between him and Buffy, because he is one of the first examples a little bit later on of him basically saying to Buffy, you're not taking her back. You're not really the best person to deal with this. We're going to protect her.
Yeah.
And that's all real. That's all really interesting.
It's good character writing. And the scene where Faith is just crying into Angel's arms, trying to provoke him to kill her and saying, I'm bad, I'm evil, is just heartbreaking. Yeah. Like, she's just a kid. The
rain is coming down, and Wesley has grabbed a kitchen knife because he's ready to kill Faith.
The torture scenes between Faith and Wesley are like genuinely vicious.
Yeah, so this is the only episode of Angel that's been rated 18 because of the...
It's unusual.
In Ireland,
it's important to know that.
Because of the specific and I suppose realistic and human-on-human violence throughout it. There's a lot of... I always think of some scenes in season 4 specifically that I always thought were particularly violent, particularly when the Beast comes along.
I can't remember, but
it's just a bit gross. But like this is just... Yeah, this is like sharp objects, hot objects, and like people in actual distress. So yeah, there's just a lot there. I think you can extrapolate a lot from all the characters in this episode by how they act. And on the lighter side, you have some interactions between Angel and Lindsay, which we've noted before that Angel's actor and Lindsay's actor are good friends in real life, and they just play off each other really well.
Yeah. My only note for the episode that I was like, was when Cordelia wakes up and finds out that Wesley's been taken or whatever. I felt her performance there where she was like really regretful and sad and freaked out. I didn't believe it for whatever reason. You were saying that the production for the episode was a bit interesting because Joss Whedon had intended for the scene between Angel and Faith at the end of the episode where they're fighting in the alleyway. He was like, I want it to rain and it's going to be really, explosive and cool and it's going to be really impactful. And he was told basically by production, like, listen, no, we can't do that. That's too expensive.
This is television. We just can't make things on that scale as consistently as you want.
Yeah.
Which was fine, but in this particular instance, from my reading, they were filming those scenes anyway during the start of a unusual and unseasonable rainstorm in LA. I presume they filmed again.
Oh, I have to imagine so, yeah.
Yeah. So the rain is realistic. And I always did feel that scene did look a bit like they were actually outside in the rain and they just seem a bit drenched. So it's just fortuitous, but I think it really does bring it...
It's visually great.
Bring it together, yeah.
It was great. I loved it. I thought it was really good.
I love Faith as a character. I have to say, I think...
Apparently she was... I didn't realize this until yesterday. Apparently she was... Liza Dushku was offered a spin-off after season 7 of Buffy, and she didn't take it. So it's a shame.
Yeah, definitely. But
I think a great show.
I think it seems like now the most obvious thing to do is give your hero a dark mirror. But I think Sarah Michelle Gellar and Liza Dushku can carry shows by themselves separately, putting them together with the nuance, with the sincerity. It's really, really become for me one of the best relationships in the entire 7 seasons is their ongoing tension with each other, to the point where Faith actually becomes a rightful peer to Buffy at the end of the series, and that they can stand side by side as the last 2 Slayers of the original line, I think is really powerful and really redemptive in a way that's earned. So I think this episode contributes a lot to it.
Yep, it's a twisty, great relationship. Yeah.
So I would probably give it I think probably 8 failed feminist gestures.
I was going for 9 failed feminist gestures, which is so funny because this is exactly what I was saying last week. You're like, oh Brian, you're never going to rate an episode of Angel higher than I will. Yeah, and I had 9 already in my head.
I set it up for you. This is the prestige that I was talking about, the payoff.
Not much of a prestige. I don't know. I felt like I was going to have a joke there, but I don't.
Brave to wander into a sentence assuming something funny was going to happen at the end of it.
I have to wander into all my sentences. I never know where any of these are going at all.
And on that note, dear listener, we will draw this to a close. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you're keeping well. We're hoping that where you are, the weather is as welcome as it has been for us here the last couple of days.
It's just been raining the whole time.
Oh, we love the rain.
I do like the rain. Yeah, it was nice because it was so warm here for a couple of days, and now it's dropped back down to a really comfortable 17 degrees Celsius. It's raining on and off, and I don't feel like tearing my skin off.
Yeah, it's better not to tear your skin off.
Yeah.
So that's it from us here at Buffy Boys HQ for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, we would be very grateful if you would like, subscribe, rate, review, let us know. Tell us what you thought. Tell your friends, tell your horny ghosts. And we will see you same Buffy time, same Buffy channel next week on Brian.
Buffy Boys.
See ya.
Slán.